Hello gamers, I'm J104 and today I'm bringing you somewhat of a continuation of a previous video, that being my Assassin's Creed Syndicate video. As I said in that video, one of the best things from that game is the Jack the Ripper DLC, which allows you to step into the Victorian boots of the Ripper as he taunts Evie and Jacob Frye, as Evie hunts down Jack, as you also play as Evie. But if I'm 100% honest, I mainly said that the Jack the Ripper DLC was the best part of the game, as that's what people have told me and what all the YouTube videos I've seen on the DLC have also informed me of. So I thought, whilst I have Syndicate installed on ye old PC, why don't I check out the DLC that everyone raves or talks so highly about to see if Jack the Ripper could save Syndicate from mediocrity. And well, the answer no, as the game is still widely regarded as mediocre at best and awful more commonly. Which I may be somewhat agreed with in my Syndicate video. There is an okay story there, but too many plot holes and other holes that needed to be fixed, along with some subpar gameplay. However, luckily in the year of our Lord 2026, Syndicate was less buggy than it would have been on launch, which I surprisingly cannot say the same about the Jack the Ripper DLC. I don't know if the DLC plays in a less stable version of Syndicate, but I experienced more bugs in the DLC's short 3-hour runtime than I did in the whole playing time of Syndicate, which I do feel it has to be the older version of a game being used, as the DLC has less map to load, as the DLC solely takes place in Whitechapel and the City of London boroughs, with some exceptions. So maybe like you can't update it in the most updated patch for the main game because it can bug out with all that world stuff, maybe more than it already bugs out. One of the main ones I saw was whenever you would walk up to the road, all the carts and carriages would go on a short trip to space. So there was one line in my Assassin's Creed Syndicate video, I mentioned that one thing that could bring down the Jack the Ripper DLC is that it uses some gameplay and engine from Syndicate, and unfortunately it's somehow worse in this case. One thing that is a lot better than the original game, and that is that they increase the darkness of Syndicate. If you watch my Syndicate video, I mentioned that the game seems too clean for the time it was set in, and now I think on that game more in the weeks after my playthrough. Part of that game more clean factor is the more jovial outlook the game has on Victorian England. Yes, there are some dark moments in the game, like the murder theatre play scene, but it just seems all too surface level, especially when compared to the game's darkness of the Ripper DLC, with the same world seeming more darker just with the presence of Jack the Ripper. Something that helps greatly with this is the game's new mechanic to the DLC, which is something I feel is a very interesting one. That being what the DLC refers to as the fear system, which allows you to terrify enemies to the point of running away from you. And there are many ways to achieve this terrified state, if that's by doing what the game refers to as a brutal takedown, which is, well, a more brutal assassination, using spikes on your enemies, which are like these tuning forks that pin the enemies to the floor. And then there are fear bombs, which are the same as smoke bombs, but instead of unleashing smoke, they dissipate fear somehow. And this whole system I like quite a bit. The only real negative I have in regards of the fear system is I wish there was more ways to grow people's fear. So there are 3 states of fearness: non-scared at all, being the normal state you find your enemies in, then suspicious, which is the middle state when enemies will attack you but more cautiously than normal. And then there is finally the state of terrification, or terrified as normal people say, when they will attempt to run away from you at all costs unless their pathing gets stuck, which is another thing that happened quite a lot. And the only way to affect these levels is the fear tools mentioned before, but I kind of wish that if an enemy just seen you wipe out half the group that they came up with, they would get an increase in fear level, even if it was just a little bit. As if you run out of fear bombs and spikes, you can't increase the fear level anymore, as the brutal takedowns are like assassinations and can only be done out of combat. Or more correctly, when you are out of combat with the person you are trying to do the takedown on. The fear system seems like a kind of half-baked system that, if you really worked out the finer details, could have been, well, the game's most talked about feature. I think it may already be up there, as the Jack the Ripper DLC is always highly talked about when it comes to Syndicate. But it's also just weird that Evie uses the fear system, so Jack the Ripper is a murderer and he will murder you gruesomely. However, Evie's fear mechanics are all based in non-lethal attacks, which consists of her using some magic smoke drugs they got from India whilst the twins were there with Henry Green, which just doesn't fit her mechanics or anything at all. Like, I think the fear should have been kept to the Ripper, as that's where it makes the most sense. Outside of the fear system, there are more things I find positive about the DLC, but first I want to talk about something I didn't touch at all in the DLC, as I think it's the most stupid narrative decision made in the whole DLC. That being the return of the gang tasks or gang takedowns, as somehow Jack has turned all of the rooks against Jacob and Evie, which I just don't like or think makes sense at all. First, Jack the Ripper is a psychopath, and I don't think he should have been able to turn the rooks against the twins. And if he somehow did, it needs to be explained more in the game than he just did it. Even if that's just in text drop. Like, were Jacob and Evie bad gang bosses, but the game doesn't care enough to go into detail if they were or were not, or come up with the details at all. But that's enough details. Let's move on to what everybody loves about the DLC, that being the Ripper himself. So the Ripper is a very infamous figure in history, quite possibly at the start of the true crime genre, or its biggest story told within true crime podcasts. The story of the Ripper's true identity and kill count being clouded in mystery still today. In the DLC, Ubisoft isn't interested in answering these questions, which to a degree I think is the right choice. More using Jack to explore the Creed's tenets pushed to the extreme, as the game does stuff with the Ripper that we know isn't true, like the Ripper being an assassin or having a prison where he kept people using prison hulks, which were decommissioned warships used as prisons, which is a real thing the British did. So I have learned one fact from the game, as I had no idea that they did this, but I'm certain that Jack did not. And clearly the game turns Jack into a more active killer than in real life, murdering hundreds of people compared to the chronological 5 of history, plus a couple more most likely. Now I want to talk about my biggest problem or issue with the story of Jack the Ripper in Assassin's Creed, and it was something I was concerned about with playing as the Ripper, as the Ripper is evil, and anything to soften or alter the crimes he has committed is a stain on the DLC, if you ask me at least. And the game does change the location and details of some of the crimes, which isn't that bad. Like, for example, there is the double event, which in real life was the murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, where with the killing of Elizabeth, Jack was seemingly interrupted as the body was not mutilated in his most famous way. And then around 45 minutes later, Catherine's body was found in Mitre Square, in a lot more worse state with organs being removed from her body. Seemingly the Ripper didn't get his perverted rocks off with the interrupted first killing. However, in Syndicate, the double event is 2 women killed at the same time in the same place. Whilst changing that isn't my biggest problem, let's cover that now, shall we? So, context leading into this part in the game. So the Ripper DLC starts with the double event as Jacob is hunting the Ripper. As Jacob knows who the Ripper is, he is an assassin that Jacob trained after Syndicate. So after the double event, Jacob is investigating when the game transitions to Jack's POV as we play as the Ripper hunting Jacob, getting into a fight with him in his apartment, when the game cuts to black with Jack having the upper hand. A couple months later, Evie arrives back in London after being in India, when she meets up with a less jovial, more competent Frank Aberline, as he says no one has heard from Jacob. So Frank takes Evie to the scene of the first murder, the victim being Mary Ann Nichols, also called Polly, where Frank drops a line about Polly not being the real body as there was an assassin ring found nearby. This I hate. The only reason we know the names of Mary Ann Nichols and Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly is the memories of the girls forever changed to just victims of the sick Ripper of Whitechapel. And then Ubisoft is taking away their deaths from them to fit into the Assassin's lore. I don't quite understand why you would do that. Just because you want the victims of the Ripper to be assassins to fit better into your story. Why not make them assassins then? I don't know, I'm probably overthinking this and getting more annoyed by it than I should, as the game doesn't really say that this isn't Nichols. It's just Aberline that implies it. And the Eagle Vision says it's Nichols, so I guess Eagle Vision can't be wrong. But like, why even put that idea out there? And if you really wanted the victims to be assassins, why not make the 5 victims themselves assassins? It's not like Jacob wasn't around brothels talking to the ladies of the night, as one of the missions has you talk to one of his contacts at a brothel. So I even think it could make sense that Jacob recruited prostitutes to work for the Brotherhood, as they would have access to areas other people wouldn't and be able to blend and camouflage in lots of situations. Now, you could also say it's fiction, why does it matter? And I don't know, it's just like with the Pope or rich Italy landowners. They keep their real names and just become Templars. But some prostitutes, they can just be changed, they're not important enough. But maybe I'm getting a little too white knighty lefty wingy here. So let's move on, as this is the biggest problem, and apart from that and the stupid side activities, which I didn't do anyways, I really do like this game more than Syndicate. So after all that negativity, let's move on to do something I kind of like. And that's the fact that Evie slowly and carefully investigates Jack the Ripper. After finding Jacob's apartment where there was very clearly signs of a struggle, Evie knows that she may not be able to take on Jack, as he is a trained assassin and clearly was able to capture and possibly kill Jacob. And I think Evie knows that Jacob is the far better fighter between the two of them. And as we find out, Jack is also watching Evie, as there's this very cool scene in Jacob's lodging where we see Jack watching Evie as the world gets physically darker around him, as he watches from the roof until Evie seemingly senses she is being watched and looks out the window to see nobody there. After that, Evie checks out the local brothel to talk to the same people as Jacob to see what he was looking into, finding out that one Lady Owers, I should have looked up that pronunciation first, but I'm going to go with Owers, it's Owers, was working with Jack as she became the target for Evie. As we arrive at her countryside manor, and after some help from her husband, we end her life. After returning to London, Evie then saves a journalist and his son, which gives her info on Jack's prison boats. After tackling down the prison boats, Evie calls in Scotland Yard when, as they show up, we switch to Jack as he assassinates his own men to keep his secrets. After Jack wipes out the rooks and the information that will lead to his secrets, we then get to the part of history where Jack performs the last of the chronological 5 murders, that being the death of the Ripper's youngest victim at only 25 years old, that being Mary Jane Kelly. Of course, we don't play as Jack during the killing, and nor should we. This, however, seems the most correct of the killings that the game shows, as she is found in a small apartment in an alleyway, and Mary Jane Kelly is the sickest, most vile of all the killings being done by Jack the Ripper, being basically teared to bits and left dead in a pool of her own blood and insides in the room. And in the room, Evie finds a message written in blood for her, leading her to investigate the other crime scenes from the Autumn of Terror. After all these clues, she is led to the Lambeth Asylum, but of course Jack is there first, destroying evidence of his true identity and killing his doctor and nurse from his stay there, also releasing a bunch of, for lack of a better word, crazy people to slow Evie down. After that, the police show up as Jack, using them to set up yet another murder with a message for Evie. So Evie shows up, sneaking past the police and getting into the asylum, where after clearing out Jack's lieutenants, we find his final message, which sends us to the basement, where she finds Jacob in a cell, not dead, however unresponsive to Evie's attempts of communication. When Jack calls out from a room nearby, Evie finally confronts the Ripper, having a very difficult battle with him, as Jack's learnings from the Creed make him a formidable opponent and also make him very adept to what Evie will throw at him, countering all of her moves with ease until Evie does some sneak attacks on him, where Evie is eventually able to defeat Jack the Lad, as he was known to the assassins. As Evie then rushes back to Jacob when Frank joins them in the cell, when Evie requests that the people don't need to know his identity.
Jacob.
Miss Frye, what the hell happened here?
Nothing, Inspector. Nothing happened here. Trust me. Jack the Ripper's dead.
Inspector!
Now help me, Frederick. No one must ever know that Jack the Ripper was an assassin.
I want those vultures gone this instant, is that clear?
Which might be the thing I agree with the most with Ubisoft's take on Jack the Ripper. I don't think we should know his real name. because that's what he probably wanted. I don't think, especially today, we need to be trying to find out the true identity of Jack the Ripper. The vile man should be forgotten, remembered only by a pen name that was most likely come up with by a copycat or imposter, not himself. It's not like we can get justice for the victims. So I did enjoy the fact that Syndicate seemed to echo my thoughts on that topic. It's not important who the Ripper is. But then they did that thing with the victims, so I'm not sure if they do agree or not. And also technically they do give us the name of Jack the Ripper. His name is literally Jack. It's more maybe Evie trying to protect the creed the more I sit here and think about it, but I'm not going to think about it too much. And at the end of the day, they don't say who he is, or at least in the world of Assassin's Creed it's not publicly out there, just like the real world. But anyways, that is a rough recap of the story. So is the DLC better than the original game? I believe it is. Even with the bugs and my issues with some of the narrative choices, it is still more enjoyable than Syndicate. I think the darker, grayer tone that the game has fits the era a bit more. Like, yes, there was a part of Industrial Revolution England, like Syndicate, that looks more like a painting. And at least in terms of Jack, the fear system had something there that maybe needed some improvements, but was something different during the bland years of Assassin's Creed. And I think making Jack an assassin is an interesting way to turn a light on the darker side of the creed and the tenets that can warp someone's mind into, and in a different way to how Shay's mind was warped away from the Brotherhood. And I do always enjoy any lore behind the Brotherhood, which we do seem to get a lot less of in the RPG games than we did back in the linear games. And whilst I'm here, this is probably the only time I'm going to talk about Jack the Ripper on this channel, so I thought I'd add a couple more things the game didn't do accurate to history. The first is his outfit. Now, all accounts from back in the day said that Jack the Ripper was most likely a well-dressed, tall-ish for the time man. However, you look at Jack's model, or flash on screen here, I wouldn't describe that as well-dressed. And another interesting theory that came up around the time of Jack the Ripper, mainly around the double event, was a theory put forward by the one and only Frank Aberline, and that was the Jill the Ripper theory. Basically, that Jack the Ripper was in fact a female, which would explain on the night of the double event. So the murders happened, I think it was 15-minute walk apart from each other, and the police flooded Whitechapel as those murders happened, but they didn't come up with anything, maybe because they were looking for a man when they should have been looking for a woman. I feel that's unlikely, but it's a thought. But that has been all for my video on Assassin's Creed Syndicate and Jack the Ripper. And maybe after playing Syndicate and the Ripper DLC, I may be in the mood to check out more Assassin's Creed games in the future. Who knows? I do, as I'm planning to do a video very soon on Assassin's Creed Liberations, a game I was unaware existed until I brought an Assassin's Creed bundle on Steam. So if you've never heard of Assassin's Creed Liberations, subscribe and you can hear me talk about it in the maybe not too distant future. Who knows? Anyways, I hope you have enjoyed this video. It was sort of set up to be a little sort of companion video to my Assassin's Creed Syndicate video. And at least from the timeline of my audio recording at this very moment, it's the same length, but there was some failed takes I'm going to cut out. It'll probably be a lot shorter. But anyways, that's not important to you guys. But if you are still watching this video, leave a like if you liked it. If not, let me know in the comments below why you're still watching if you didn't like it this far in. I don't know, but thank you anyways, and I'll hopefully see you around in the next one. Peace.